The Colts already got arguably the top offensive head coaching candidate this cycle. Might they follow it up with the top quarterback in the draft? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. All right, now that we're all coming down off the high that was that live stream last night talking about the coaching movement. If you're just blind with rage and you forget, I'm Jake Arthur. He is Zach Hicks. You know the two of us from horseshoehuddle.com. So just to remind you guys, on today's show, we're going to be talking about a project that Zach has been starting. On Monday, he put it out on horseshoehuddle.com, profiling each of these top four quarterbacks in the draft and how they match with Shane Steichen. Up first is the most often considered top quarterback in the draft, Bryce Young, and how he fits with Steichen and potentially the Colts. Will they need to trade up to get him? Will concern about his height shuffle him down and make him available at number 4? I don't know. We'll see, though. But Zach will tell us if the Colts do get him, how exactly he fits with Steichen. So up first is his history in empty sets at Alabama, the frequency at which he has used them and how he can kind of thrive in those in a quick passing environment. So, Zach, why don't you go ahead? I'll open the floor to you. Tell us about Bryce Young and these empty sets.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have this misconception about Shane Steichen's offense there with Philadelphia, where yes, it was very dependent on the run game and Jalen Hurts' ability to affect defenses with his rushing ability. But on top of that, there still was an effective passing game built around it. Yes, having that +1 rusher and Jalen Hurts for teams to account for did open up the passing game. But Shane Steichen was able to build a system that played to Jalen Hurts' strengths. And a large part of that system was something we call empty theory. So empty theory is something that my guy, Honest NFL on Twitter, if you guys are familiar with his work, phenomenal football mind. He used to work with the Philadelphia Eagles. He taught me all about empty theory the other day. So shout out to him. Great dude, great resource. One day I will figure out his name, but the Honest NFL. And I'm going to put up a diagram that he shared with me. If you guys are watching on Twitter, watching on YouTube, you guys can pause the video and read about it all you want. This diagram right here is going to show all the different reads and ideas around empty theory when it comes to facing, man coverage versus zone coverage, pressure looks and stuff like that. You could see so many different things with empty theory and where quarterbacks will attack defenses within empty theory. One reason why I bring up empty theory is not that Shane Steichen is this big proponent of empty theory and a guy who created empty theory, but you know who is the biggest proponent of it? Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien is by far and away the biggest proponent of this. I think he ran empty sets with Houston back in the day, like 20% of the time. Like 20% of all snaps with Deshaun Watson and Houston Texans was out of empty personnel. And then he goes to Alabama with Bryce Young the last 2 seasons, and they're running empty personnel 15 to 20% of the time as well. So Bryce Young is very adept to empty personnel, getting guys out in space and reading off of empty theory, which again, I'll throw up this diagram right here. You can see where the hot reads are. You can see the benefits of being an empty and how it impacts, blitz reading and just certain matchups in that way. Shane Steichen's not a guy who comes from a background in empty personnel or empty theory, but he saw with Jalen Hurts a guy who can find success that way. So with Jalen Hurts, he built around a quick passing game that kind of revolved around empty sets and empty theory. I think they ran empty sets 10% of the time last year. Now, some of them they did rush out of those sets, so it is a little bit skewed by the rushing attempts with Jalen Hurts, but they did ingrain that into their offense this past year. So when I look at Bryce Young's fit with the Indianapolis Colts and with Shane Steichen, I'm looking at what they did with empty sets there with Jalen Hurts, because we actually have tangible evidence that Shane Steichen can buy into empty theory and buy into usage of heavy empty sets to help out his quarterback. And that's something that Bryce Young is going to be coming into the NFL with extreme knowledge of. So we have that kind of history there with Shane Steichen and using these type of sets to benefit his quarterback. And Bryce Young is someone who already benefits in that system. So when you look at those two, this is where I see a really good marriage between these two players, with these two aspects. Bryce Young can operate really well out of these sets. Shane Steichen has a history of using these sets just recently. And I think that's going to bode really well for his time in Indy if he were to be the draft pick.
So I'm kind of curious thinking of that. So empty sets, obviously no backfield. It's just the quarterback, all the pass catchers split out wide, or throughout the lineup.
Right.
Do the Colts have the personnel for that right now, or will they need to work on that more? Adding a slot receiver. What do they need to do in order to kind of run that successfully?
So here's the beauty with empty personnel. It's not defined by certain personnel sets. It's not always going to be 4 receivers, 1 tight end. You can have certain sets where, the Philadelphia Eagles did this a lot with Shane Steichen. There were certain sets where they had Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell out as the wide receivers. They had A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith there in the slot. And then they had Dallas Goedert, in tight on the line. And they would just attack those slots there with A.J. Brown running a quick slant or Devontae Smith running a quick out or something like that against linebackers or against safeties or against slot corners, and just attacking those matchups with how they use the personnel groups. So for the Colts, it might not come down to, we're going to put Zach Moss out wide and Jonathan Taylor out wide, because who's going to be threatened by those guys? But it could be, Michael Pittman Jr. and Paris Campbell on one side, Jelani Woods out wide on the other, Alec Pierce in the slot. You could just be kind of creative with who you have. Yes, they probably need to add more weapons to this offense if you're going to be creative like this, but you can be creative by throwing, again, Jelani Woods, Andrew Ogletree, Kylan Granson. These are guys that you could throw out there. They have some tight ends, they're athletes. They have Alec Pierce, they have Paris Campbell potentially if they bring him back. They have Michael Pittman Jr. who can play slot or outside. So it's not really kind of like a, we need 4 receivers for this. We need 5 receivers for this. It's how do we best utilize the weapons that we have, and how do we get beneficial matchups? And what we saw a lot with the Eagles last year and with Bryce Young in Alabama is they would put their best receiver in the slot and spread everything out wide and be like, hey, this 3rd and 4, you have A.J. Brown versus a slot corner. There you go. Or A.J. Brown versus a safety, or Devonta Smith versus a linebacker. You know exactly where you're going with the ball. Even if that opponent is lining up to blitz 6 guys on you, because you don't have a running back to block, you have your hot read right there. You have your hot read down to a key, because you know where your prime matchup is. So that's what empty theory is in a nutshell. I'm not a huge proponent of it. Frank Reich wasn't a huge proponent of it. He liked to keep that running back there, but we have a known tangible history of Shane Steichen using empty theory. We have Bryce Young obviously operating at a high level there at Alabama. So if the Colts were to select Bryce Young, that's a really good marriage right there between those two.
That makes me feel like Paris Campbell would be a must resign, because that seems like he would really eat in a scenario like that, because the quickness over the middle on those quick shots, that seems like a good one. And also, not for nothing, but the empty sets and everything, that kind of lends itself to the Drew Brees comparison that some people like to throw out there with Bryce Young.
Right. Yeah, no, and it kind of goes back to a little bit with Shane Steichen's history too, where I feel like a lot of Steichen got this from like the Ken Wisenhunt days of his career, where he was under Ken Wisenhunt. Ken Wisenhunt's entire philosophy was built around the run after catch, to spread everything out. It could be 4 receivers, it could be 5 receivers, it could be in the gun, it could be under center, whatever. We're going to get as many run after catch opportunities as possible to let our playmakers make plays. And I think that's where Shane Steichen kind of adopted this empty theory type of thing with Philadelphia, where, they worked in heavy screen game, heavy RPO game, heavy, empty set game to where they could get the ball out in space, because they want these guys to create after the catch. So yeah, there is kind of a history with Shane Steichen and empty theory, but he really picked up on it when he saw what Jalen Hurts could do, which shows the malleability of Shane Steichen. Obviously, he will adjust to his quarterback, but taking away the fact that he can adjust to his quarterback, he won't have to adjust to Bryce Young, because he already is doing this, and this is why Shane Steichen got a head coaching job. He got the head coaching job for his work with Jalen Hurts. And if you're looking at the passing game that Jalen Hurts is coming from, it best fits Bryce Young, what Bryce Young was just doing in college.
So pretty much everyone's universal biggest concern with Young is his size. He might be the size of a high school sophomore soaking wet. So that means a lot of people don't really want him running the ball. So before we look at why it either is or isn't a good idea to use Young in mobile situations, we want to talk to you guys about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sports book. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and three-pointers drained.
Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, guys, so this next segment here, I wanted to throw in here, even though it really wasn't too prevalent in the article itself, I wanted to throw this section in here because there's one big part of that Shane Steichen offense in Philly that we can't ignore that won't translate to Bryce Young, and that is the quarterback rushing element. Jalen Hurts rushed the ball, I think, like 175 times last year. Some of those were on, QB scrambles and such, but I believe it was like 120 design QB runs, like by far and away the most in the league last year. Jalen Hurts was used as like a running back in a lot of situations. We saw in the Super Bowl, 7 QB sneaks, a couple QB draws. He did a lot of things as a rusher. So the reason why I wanted to throw this in here is Shane Steichen's offense still works with Bryce Young despite not having that rushing element. It does hurt, It does hurt. But Jake, I wanted to just get your thought on this. Would you run Bryce Young at all with his size? He's not a bad athlete. It's just, personally, I would try to limit that as much as possible,
Yeah, I wouldn't draw up a bunch of design runs, but there are certain carries I saw of his at Alabama that some of it was probably him, but I thought he was pretty good inside the 5 or 10, the opponent's 5 or 10 yard line. He's really quick and he's faster than the average defender, front 7 defender. So he's able to get that separation and just get it going. So I wouldn't just draw up a bunch of run plays for him. No, but like if you need 4 or 5 yards and you want to boot him to the outside or just do something with him to limit his exposure to big hits while still using his athleticism, because I do think he's pretty fast and that he could turn a corner. I think you can do it in that way, but no, I'm not sending him on QB sneaks all the time, or I'm not putting him in the belly of the beast. Because if you're going to make the investment in Bryce Young as a top 10 pick, you have to be cognizant of the fact that he's undersized. And the biggest concern with players like that, regardless of their muscle mass, is always going to be injury. So if you're going to make that investment, like don't drive your brand new car 90 miles an hour all the time. You know what I mean? Like, just have a smart idea of how to use them. So there are certain ways to use his mobility without getting him hurt in the process.
Right. And I completely agree with you. And I'm glad that you went in the direction I thought you were going to go when I asked you that question. I asked a question not knowing the answer. I would fail law school, but I agree with everything you just said. You don't want to run him too much, but I do think he gives you enough to where, with outside zone rushes out of the gun, you could occasionally flip in a read option and get him on the edge, and he could slide down for a gain of 5 or 6 just to keep the defense honest and keep that backside defensive end from crashing down so hard. But I agree with you. I don't want to run Bryce Young. This is a guy who's going to be 5'9", 5'10", 185 pounds in the NFL. No matter what he comes in at the combine, he's going to be like 185 pounds when the season starts. It's just how it's going to be. I don't care what the combine says. It's going to be all water weight. So how do you mitigate that? How do you still let him work in Shane Steichen's offense when you don't have that rushing element? Well, Shane Steichen also used a lot of RPOs, with Philly. And contrary to popular belief, you don't have to be a mobile quarterback to operate an RPO. In fact, RPO, it literally means nothing if the quarterback can run or not for the success of an RPO. So an RPO is a run pass option. where you are either handing the ball off to that running back in front of you, typically out of the gun, because that's what Shane Steichen did. They were 90% in shotgun last season. So they were almost exclusively in shotgun last year. And Bryce Young also was like exclusively in shotgun at Alabama. But so you're going to pretend like you're handing the ball off, or you're going to hand the ball off. That's your option that you're reading. And then if you see those linebackers crash down too hard, you're pulling it out and hitting it over the middle, or you're hitting an out route or hitting a quick screen. It's all about what those offensive linemen are doing. It doesn't really matter if the quarterback can run or not, because that's not what affects the RPO. The linebacker is going to bite when they see the offensive line moving like they're run blocking. Bryce Young was extremely proficient on RPOs at Alabama. They used it a lot. Like, they used it more than Philadelphia last year, and Philadelphia ran it on 20% of their offensive plays. So 20% of Philadelphia's offensive plays were RPO. They did this a ton. And if you watch any Alabama game, you will see a ton of RPOs. Again, probably even more than what Philly was doing. College stats are a little harder to find than the NFL ones. But if I had to put a number on it, it 100% would be more than what Philly was doing. Bryce Young is just super, super effective on these. He's got a really quick trigger. He's a really smart player. He knows when to read those linebackers and read the what's the word I'm looking for? To read the conflict defender. That's what it's called. The conflict defender. You're reading that one defender and attacking that empty spot behind them. Bryce Young is extremely proficient on it. So you can still have an effective passing game while not having that rushing ability, because you have RPOs, because you have quick screens and quick wide receiver screens. Those can mitigate some of the yardage that you're losing on QB runs. That's what the Eagles did a lot last year too. A lot of quick screens, a lot of getting the ball out in space. And then on top of that, again, you got those Ken Wisenhunt triangle reads and those quick passes over the middle that could attack different layers of a defense. And this is where I think Bryce Young's even more developed as a passer than what Jalen Hurts was there in Philly. Bryce Young is more proficient and more effective over the middle of the field than Jalen Hurts was, especially on those high-low reads over the middle. So you will lose some in the rushing game. I'm not gonna deny that. I'm not gonna say Bryce Young can even come close to what Jalen Hurts gave the Eagles as a runner, but you're gonna gain a lot more as a passing game, and you're gonna be able to build off of what Shane Steichen already started there in Philly. Again, heavy RPO game, heavy empty sets, heavy triangle reads, heavy wide receiver screens. These are things that were so dominant in that Philly scheme that Bryce Young is already doing at a very high level. So yes, again, you are losing that rushing element, but you're going to be able to pick up so much more in the passing game that Shane Steichen already has set in motion from what he's bringing from Philly.
So Young, if he lands in Indy, obviously won't be doing it all on his own. Just for my money, I thought, with the more RPOs in 2021 when Jonathan Taylor was unbelievable, do you think that's something that is tailored better to his game? Like, if you take Bryce Young and you implement more RPOs back into the offense like you were before, is that something that's going to perhaps get Jonathan Taylor rolling again?
Yeah, so here's the beauty of RPO passes and why they took the league by storm for years. I mean, Chris Collinsworth was calling everything an RPO. Every play action on Sunday Night Football, he was loving it because he was just obsessed with RPOs. Even when he was wrong on 90% of them, he was obsessed with it, and he was telling us all how everything was an RPO because it was so hot right then. But with RPOs, again, it's all about making conflict defenders think and guess. So say I'm a linebacker, right? And I have my keys and my reads, and I'm reading, if I'm an outside linebacker, I'm going to read one of the guards on every single play. So if I see a guard run blocking to start the snap, to start a play, I'm going to shoot forward because I need to stop that run. I need to get to my gap before that lineman. I need to stop it. Now say I'm the conflict defender to the offense and I'm flying forward and they're throwing the ball right over my head to where I was supposed to be if we were in coverage. The next time they do that exact same play, I'm going to hesitate. Or I'm going to stay in coverage and not attack up the middle. So this benefits Jonathan Taylor so much in so many ways, because if you have linebackers second guessing against any running back, it's going to lead to more yards and more yards after carry and just more yards before contact. But Jonathan Taylor, if you're giving him more space, which we saw last year, everything was so muddied for him. He could not have any space to move last year. If you are starting to make those linebackers second guess if they should be dropping into coverage or if they should be tacking downhill, that's going to just give so much more yards to a guy like Jonathan Taylor. And again, I do think there are multiple quarterbacks in this draft that can operate an RPO heavy scheme. Bryce Young, I think, is the best at it, but these are type of things that can certainly open up things for Jonathan Taylor and lead to more success next year. So yeah, I think if they go to an RPO heavy scheme with a guy like Bryce Young, it's just going to lead to so much more success for Jonathan Taylor.
I think that's music to a lot of people's ears. So coming up in a second, we'll just check out why Bryce Young might actually be the best fit for Steichen moving forward. All right, Zach. So we know who Bryce Young is by this point. You know, the tape is out there. We know some of his strengths. Obviously, he can't change his size, but he does have, you know, the best quarterback coaching chameleon that was available in this cycle now with the Colts. Is that the perfect matchup?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, and I go back to what Ben Solak told us, because it was something that really rang with me. Again, we're talking about a guy in Shane Steichen who is that chameleon, a guy who can coach a guy like Phillip Rivers, who is an immobile pocket passer with not the strongest arm, and get good production out of him. And then he can go to Justin Herbert and incorporate more of a downfield attack and get great production out of him in that rookie season. And then go to Jalen Hurts and incorporate a rushing attack on top of that. You know, it's a guy who can call a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, Shane Steichen was hired for what he did in Philly. What he did in Philly is his magnum opus. You know, that's his masterpiece. That is his whatever Shakespeare's is Shakespeare's Hamlet. You know, whatever one you think is Shakespeare's best. That is what Shane Steichen is known for. You know, what he did in Philly. And if you're looking at all these quarterbacks in this class, yes, you could make the argument that Anthony Richardson adds the most +1 rushing attack that he got out of Jalen Hurts. So therefore, Anthony Richardson would be the best fit. But when I look at that Philly passing game and I look at all the things they were doing with the quick screen game, with the RPO game, with empty sets, it's Bryce Young. Bryce Young best fits that Philly offense. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, that's the direct way that Shane Steichen's going to go in Indy. He's not going to just recreate that Philly offense from scratch and go perfect 1-to-1. But I think if you're looking at the things that Shane Steichen's going to want to build off of, his successes there in Philly that got him a head coaching job, Bryce Young is that guy in this class. You know, yes, the size is concerning. Yes, he's not going to have that rushing element, but he's such an advanced passer, such a smart passer, such an anticipatory passer that he can operate that scheme at such a high level that I think passing-wise, even higher than what Jalen Hurts was doing last season.
So what we know about a Shane Steichen quarterback and why Young might be a fit. So Steichen said at his introductory press conference that his ideal quarterback is accurate. He makes good decisions. He has the ability to create, and he's got to be obsessed with his craft. That's all Bryce Young.
Except he's got the body of a middle schooler.
Exactly. Hey, at least I said sophomore before. So, no, the thing, a lot of us until the Colts hired Steichen said there's probably no way Bryce Young comes here because he couldn't be further from Chris Ballard's size profile, especially at quarterback. He's dealt with the Andrew Luck injuries before. That's pretty risky. But Chris Ballard has let his head coaches take the reins at quarterback before. And so how much influence will Steichen have? I mean, he's the new guy in town, but he's the guy that's going to have to use him. He's an offensive-minded head coach. He'll be calling the plays. It would be wise to let him have a very heavy influence in his quarterback. So who is he going to like? The deciding factor I've mentioned is going to be stuff we don't hear about probably. It's going to be the how they do with the X's and O's, what their work ethic is like. It's going to be the stuff that these teams find out from doing years of research, talking to their high school coaches and teammates, and like every trainer and coach they've been around, basically. So that's going to be a tough one, but the obsession with their craft thing is probably going to be play a pretty heavy hand in who they pick.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating just for me to pull the whole curtain back here and step away from the Bryce Young conversation and just look at this overall quarterback class for the Colts or for everyone in general. It's a fascinating quarterback class. It really is, because you look at these guys, there's no Zach Wilson. You know, I know a lot of people will say Will Levis is like Zach Wilson, but if you look at Zach Wilson, he's a guy where we kind of saw a lot of character things kind of come up in the media, a lot of things about yada, yada, yada. I'm not saying they were all true, but, you know, there was a lot of reason to be really skeptical about him. But if you're looking for things to check off off the field with each of these quarterbacks. Bryce Young, by all accounts, phenomenal person who's done a lot of community work and been a team captain there on a winning program. CJ Stroud, we all know his story with his dad and everything, which ESPN's going to go crazy about on draft night. But the background that he comes from and the things he's achieved in his life, just phenomenal. Will Levis, who's done hundreds of thousands of hours of community service, team captain, apparently is going to kill it on the whiteboards and stuff like that. Anthony Richardson was like a volunteer fireman and stuff like that, and just a really quiet, reserved kid who opened up as the season went on. Like, it's such a fascinating class just off the field, and then on the field you have these very talented yet flawed quarterbacks, and then you got a team like Indy where so many things are going to have to mesh together with it. Jim Irsay is probably going to like the production of CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. Those are going to be his guys production wise that he's going to be pounding the table for, and love what they can already bring. Chris Ballard's typically an upside guy though. Will he want a Will Levis or will he want an Anthony Richardson because he loves that upside? And then you got the Shane Steichen element where, Bryce Young probably fits his passing attack best. Anthony Richardson best fits his rushing attack. Will Levis could be the best of both worlds. And, CJ Stroud could remind him of Phillip Rivers, like there's so many different elements to this. And we're still so early in this process for, actually deciding anything, that I think it's going to be a really fascinating conversation. That's why I wanted to do this series where I go quarterback by quarterback and talk about how Shane Steichen could build an offense around them. I'm not really going into it saying the exclamatory things I said about Bryce Young in that article where I'm saying he's the perfect fit. It's more of all these guys can be the perfect fit with Shane Steichen. I'm just saying Bryce Young, if you look at that Philadelphia film last year, is the perfect fit. But as you guys will see as this series goes on, when I go into CJ Stroud, I could bring things from the Phillip Rivers days, from the Justin Herbert days even, and say, here's how Shane Steichen can make him the perfect fit. For Will Levis, I could look at the Justin Herbert stuff and say, just do this again. For Anthony Richardson, I could look at all the QB runs this past season with Jalen Hurts and say, do this again. There's so many ways that these quarterbacks can fit Shane Steichen and fit the Colts. That just adds to the intrigue of this draft season. So yeah, I'm really excited about it. You guys can tell by me going off the walls here and going crazy and getting away from that crazy chat from last night, obviously. But this quarterback class is fascinating to me. And I'm really excited to keep talking about these guys because I really could see the Colts going with any of these four quarterbacks.
Yeah, the good news, if you guys thought the head coaching search and the talk about it took a lot, we still have 2 months until the draft. So
oh, Lord.
There's going to be a lot of quarterback chat. We'll eventually get to other positions, but the Colts we're in a spot this offseason to have to check off the two most important boxes in a football organization. So
right.
Still quarterback time until it ain't, baby.
Yep, it's 100% quarterback season, and just to leave off something with this podcast before we close it out. Again, I'm not running Bryce Young, absolutely not running Bryce Young. High school, sophomore, middle school body, whatever you want to call it, I'm not running him. But I think he's such an advanced passer that he could thrive in Shane Steichen's passing attack. So I'm on board with Bryce Young being the pick, and obviously, as the weeks go on here and I write more of these articles, you'll hear me say, I'm on board with CJ Stroud being the pick. I'm on board with Will Levis being the pick. I'm on board with Anthony Richardson because I think all these guys can work. But Bryce Young, the reason why I think he can work is that Philly passing game last season was built around what Bryce Young has already been doing in college. And I think that's going to be a great fit for him if Bryce Young is the pick.
Yep. No qualms here. That is it for us, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow to bring you the latest on Steichen, his new staff, the scuttlebutt on rumors on who's going to join that, and then what else the Colts might do this offseason.
Yeah, make sure you guys are following us on social media at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also, subscribe to Locked On Colts podcast on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love your ratings and reviews. Just, chill a little bit in the live stream chats, but we love your ratings and reviews, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.